Do you think this reveals a deeper problem in terms of ideology and the governance of Harvard, in maybe the culture of Harvard?
Yes. So on governance, the governance structure is a disaster. So the way it works today is Harvard has two principal boards. There's the board of the corporation, the so-called fellows of Harvard. It's a board of, I think, 12 independent directors and the president. There's no shareholder vote. There's no proxy system. It's really a self-perpetuating board that effectively elects its own members. So there's, once the balance tips politically one way or another, it can be kept that way forever. There's no kind of rebalancing system. If a U.S. corporation goes off the rails, so to speak, the shareholders can get together and vote off the directors. There's no ability to vote off the directors. Then there's the board of overseers, which is, I think, 32 directors. And there, a few years ago, if you could put together 600 signatures, you could run for that board and put up a bunch of candidates, and about 5 or 6 get elected each year. And a group did exactly that, and it was an oil and gas kind of disinvestment group. They got the signatures, a couple of them got elected, and Harvard then changed the rules. And they said, now we need 3,200 signatures. And by the way, if there are these dissident directors on the board, we're going to cap them at 5. So if 3 were elected in the oil and gas thing, now there are only 2 seats available. Mm-hmm. And then a group of former students, kind of younger alums, one of whom I knew, approached me and said, "Look, Bill, we should run for the board." And they decided this pretty late, only a few weeks before the signatures were due. And we'd love your support. I took a look at their platform. I thought it looked great. I said, "Look, happy to support." And I posted about them, did a Zoom with them, and they got thousands of signatures. Collectively, the 4 got 12,000 signatures or something like this. And they missed by about 10% the threshold. And what did Harvard do in the middle of the election? They made it very, very difficult to sign up, for a vote. And it just makes them look terrible. And they've got now thousands of alums upset that, and again, this wasn't an election. This was just to put the names on the slate. So the only candidates on the slate are the ones selected by the existing members. And so it's businesses fail because of governance failures. Universities fail because of governance failures. It's not really the president's fault, because the job of the board is to hire and fire the president and help guide the institution academically and otherwise. So that's governance. On ideology, I was like, how can this be? October 7th, the event that woke me up was 30 student organizations came out with a public letter on October 8th, literally the morning after this letter was created, and said, Israel is solely responsible for Hamas's violent acts. Again, Israel had not even mounted a defense at this point, and there were still terrorists running around in the southern part of Israel. And I'm like, Harvard students, 34 Harvard student organizations signed this letter. And I'm like, what is going on? WTF, right? And that's when I went up on campus and I started talking to the faculty. And that's when I started hearing about, actually, Bill, it's this DEI ideology. I'm like, what? DEI, like diversity, equity, inclusion. Obviously I'm familiar with these words, and I see this in the corporate context. And they say, yeah. And they started talking to me about this oppressor-oppressed framework, which is effectively taught on campus and represents the backdrop for many of the courses that are offered and the various, some of the studies and other degree offerings. I'm like, I had not even heard of this. And, I'm a pretty aware person, but I was completely unaware. And basically they're like, look, Israel is deemed an oppressor and the Palestinians are deemed the oppressed. And you take the side of the oppressed, and any acts of the oppressed to dislodge the oppressor, regardless of how vile or barbaric, are okay. I'm like, okay, this is a super dangerous ideology. And so I wrote a questioning post about this. I'm like, here's what I'm hearing. Is this right? And then I had a friend of mine sent me Christopher Rufo's book, America's Cultural Revolution, which is sort of a sociological study of the origins of the DEI movement and critical race theory. And I found it actually one of the more important books I've read and also I found it quite concerning. And really, it's sort of ultimately DEI comes out of a kind of a Marxist, socialist backdrop way to look at the world. And so I think there are a lot of issues with it, but unfortunately, it's advancing. I ultimately concluded racism as opposed to fighting it, which is what I thought it was ultimately about.